a login page that it's functional. It allows us to log in with several types of user, but currently it's using a client-side data model that that we want to be able to move it over to the server side. Okay, so let's look at the implementation. If we look at the login page right now, if we look at the login page, it's currently implemented in here, login view, and behind the scenes, this template is backed by a controller that is responsible for handling the user interaction. Right, as the user clicks and drags, all those events are intercepted and handled by the controller. Right, those are very well defined roles. Right, the HTML is there to interact directly with the user and render output, whereas the controller's responsibility is to receive those events that are generated by the user and then map them to some action, to some backend. Right now, that backend is represented by a user service, which is a place where all our data is being stored right now. If we go to the user service, we'll notice that the service has a hard-coded list of users here, and plus APIs that allow us to create new users, update users, retrieve users by using various criteria. We can retrieve users by username and password, by ID. We can retrieve users in different ways, but they mostly interact with the hard-coded array, okay, of users. I believe last time we met on Monday, we started working on find user by what? Let's see. We worked on find user by ID. Okay, we worked on that one, and we were able to move all the logic that was here. We moved it over to the server. Okay, we were able to do that. Today we're going to keep working on that. Eventually, this service will become just an interface that just talks to the service, to the server. Right? We're going to replace all the logic here. We're going to replace them to several of these gets and posts and puts and deletes going back to the server. Right? The actual logic is not going to live here. Right? We're going to move all that logic to the server where it belongs. Okay. So the service, the client service here, is only going to be a very thin layer, right? That is going to be interacting with a thin layer on the server side. So we're going to have these kind of like these sister JavaScript files that talk to one another. On the client side, we're going to have a user service client, and on the server, we're going to have something called user service server. Right, that's going to have kind of like the counterpart of all the logic that has to handle all user data access. Right now, it's inside of app.js. Here's where the call. Here's where the client call of finding user by ID is. We're sending it over to the server, and the server is receiving it here. Right, and then retrieving that particular user from the users in the server. So we're going to be doing more of this today. We're going to practice quite a few times. Once we've done it a few times, hopefully you'll find a pattern, right? And you'll identify, oh, it's always the same thing. And once you've seen me do it several times, I hope you feel comfortable to be able to do it on your own for the other services. Okay. All right. All right, so let's get started. Let's first work on the login page. This is where it all starts. Okay. Right now, if we click on login, the view has a login button. Let's see, the login button is right here. If we click on the login button, it says that we're going to call the login function on the controller. See that? And that login function on the controller is right here. Right, here's the controller that goes along with that. And here's the binding of the login function. There is. This function is the login function that's being called right here from the template. There it is. And there's a function right there. It receives a user. There's our user from the template. We receive it, and then well, we do some minor validation. If there is no user, then we complain and say, "Oop, there's no user found." But then we use the user service to look for the user by username and password, meaning check to see if the username and password match. If so, hopefully this user will be some user object. If presumably there was no user with that username and password, it'll be null and we'll complain. If it was, we did find a user, that will navigate to their profile. Yes? Now that user service right now is being implemented on the client side. This find user by username is right here, implemented right there in the right there, right? And here's the function that goes along with that, and takes as argument the username and password. Right now, it's using the local array, right? The hard-coded array that we're hosting here in the service. Yes? Sorry, this array. Yes? We want to change it so that instead it goes out to the server to check for this, right? We don't want to do it here on the client. We want to do it on the server. All right? All right, so let's do that. Let's change this to instead go and fetch all this information from the server, not from here. Okay? So what we like to be able to do is pass the username and password, pass it along to the server as arguments, as parameters, right? And then do this search, do it on the server side. So we want to move this over. All right, so what we're going to do is, because we're retrieving data from the server, we're going to do something similar like we did earlier, right? We're going to generate an HTTP GET, right? Like the name suggests, right? We are retrieving, getting information from the server. Right? So it's appropriate that we use a GET, right? So we're going to generate a GET, okay? And we're going to go out to the server, and that server is going to be running locally on HTTP localhost 3000. Right, that's where it's going to be running locally. And you might say, well, what about when I deploy this on Heroku? How is this going to work? Right, this is not going to work when I deploy this on Heroku. And that's fine. You don't actually need the domain. You don't actually need the domain. Right? Since this file was already downloaded from localhost 3000 or downloaded from Heroku, from wherever your domain is, yes? This domain is implied. Right? The domain is implied, right? And so if you don't tell us what the domain is, the browser will assume that it's the same domain where this file was downloaded. Yes? So this will work fine locally, and it will work fine when you deploy it on your remote server. Make sense? Right? The domain will be prepended to this path. Yes? Okay. All right. So when I'm going to get this, I'm not going to add the domain. I'm going to say I want to find a user. Okay. Do I know the ID of this user? I don't, right? Because I don't know who they are. That's the whole point, right? I'm trying to find out who they are because it provided me with a username and password. All right. So one way that I could do is to pass along the username here, right, and pass the password here. Yes. Instead, I'm going to do it another way. Instead, I'm going to pass the arguments using a query string. Okay, query strings are any data, any string that are passed after the question mark. Right? In the URL has several parts. Right? It has a domain, right? It has a path, okay, and then it has the query string. It has those three large parts. Yes. The domain, I'm not putting the domain because that's implied. The path here is just /user. Okay? And then I'm going to pass in several query parameters, and that's done after the question mark. So I'm going to pass a query parameter called username. Its value is going to be the value that I'm passing as arguments right here. Okay? And then I'm going to pass another parameter called password, and then equal the password that I'm passing as argument. Okay, so this is going to generate a URL. Actually, one better way to look at this is that we're going to have to create a variable URL equal to that. So this is going to generate something like slash user question mark username equal Alice, and then password equal Alice. Notice that the data Alice, the name, the username, and the parameter password are being concatenated here. See that? We need to delimit those, and to delimit it, query parameters are delimited with an ampersand. Okay, so let's add the ampersand right here. So we're splitting it where the actual data and the actual parameter begin and when one ends and when the other one starts. Yes? Everybody okay? All right, so this is going to go out to slash user. And so slash user, there it is, user, URL. Okay? And we're not going to do the for loop. Let's not do the for loop for now. So let's restart the server. Well, actually, we don't need to restart it. Let's refresh the login page, and we're going to inspect so that we can snoop what the communication, the network connections are between our client and the server. So let's try putting here Alice and Alice. If we look at the network, we say login. Notice that we are indeed generating a GET request. If you look at the headers, we are indeed generating the GET request. See that? Right? And the URL pattern looks okay. Slash user, question mark, username Alice, ampersand, password equal Alice. So it looks okay. Right? The server is complaining, saying that that URL doesn't map to anything on the server. So it doesn't know what to give me back. Right? So it gives me a 404, which is appropriate. It says that's not found. I haven't found. I don't find anything mapped to that. So that means we have to go back to the server and create that mapping. We're going to go back to my app.js on the server, and I'm going to use my express instance, right, that we are requiring. Right, we're using it to create several handlers, right, several HTTP handlers, meaning we're going to be listening for incoming HTTP requests from anybody, in particular from our client, right, from our Angular client, but it could come from anywhere. And we need to listen for that incoming request. So I'm going to add here another HTTP, not HTML, HTTP handler. Right? I'm going to listen for an incoming request slash user, and then the query string, right? Username, whatever. But the query string is actually ignored here in when you declare the URL the URL handler. The query string is not added to the actual URL. The server actually ignores everything that follows after the query string for routing purposes. Right? It's not used to detect the URL. It still parses it, and it's still available for you to look at those parameters, but the only up to the path is used, right, for a server to decide, to distinguish one URL pattern versus another URL pattern. Okay, the query string is not used to distinguish between URL patterns. Okay, so that if you have this URL pattern and you have another one saying username and the other one saying password, the server can't actually tell these apart. Okay, it cannot distinguish that these are two distinct patterns. Okay, it only uses everything before the question mark to be able to distinguish. This, as far as the server is concerned, these are identical. They're mapped to the same thing. It's ambiguous. It says, what do you want me to do? I can't handle both. I need this to be handled only once. Okay, so what do we want to do? We want to handle this and provide here a function that handles that incoming user request. Right. So I'm going to use a naming convention in that here. Notice that the function that is generating this request is called find user by username and password. See that? Okay, I'm gonna map this to this function. I'm gonna kind of try to follow the architecture of who generated this request. I'm mapping it to a function of the same name over here. Okay, so when this comes in from the client, it's going to call this function right here. So let's make sure that indeed is being invoked. Okay, so that's on the server side. Let's restart the server. Restart the server. So here's the server, and here's the client. If I refresh and I try to log in, and I say log in, the server, notice that indeed it has printed find user by username and password. So the request got to the server. Yes, we are hitting the server now. Everybody okay? Yes? All right. But our function is not actually doing anything. Right? It's just printing out the function, the name of the function, but it doesn't do anything. And that's why notice that our request that went out to the server, it's still pending. Right? As the server hasn't responded. So the browser is kind of waiting for the server to respond. I sent out this request, but the server has never responded. Right? It was too lazy. It only printed out something to the console. It never responded back. So let's at least respond. Right? To respond, if you remember these functions, when they are intercepted and invoked by the server, they are passed two arguments. The first argument represents everything that is coming from the client, right? The IP address of the browser, the timestamp when the HTTP request was made, any cookies, any information that comes from the client is going to be represented by the first argument. The second argument allows the server to generate a response, right? So that we can create the client-server lifecycle, right? The client generates a request, the server interprets that request, and then it generates a response, right? That's the basis of all internet technologies, right? All internet technologies are based on this basic architecture, right? Where you have the client generating an HTTP request, the server handling that request, and then generating a response. Yes? And the client gets into this timeout pattern of waiting, right? Just waiting for the server to at some point hopefully respond. Eventually the client will get tired of waiting for the server to respond, and it will just time out. And says, "Oh, sorry, the server never responded." Notice that it's still pending, I think. It's still pending. It's still waiting for the server to answer. It doesn't know that the server is never going to answer. Let me stop the server. Stop the server. And now it stops. And now it stops waiting. It says failed, right? So there was a connection. There was a live connection between the client and the server, but the server never responded back. Right? It never closed that connection. All right. So let's have the server actually respond with an RES. It can send back whatever we want. In particular, let's send back just the name of the function. Okay. So let's restart the server. Let's go back. Let's refresh. Let's clear this out, and let's do a login. So there it is. So it went out. Notice that now it's not pending. See that? It came back with a 200 saying, okay, the server did respond. If we click on the response, notice that here it's showing what the server responded. Here's the actual ASCII text that the server responded, and that's exactly what we responded. There it is, right? That's the string we responded with. Yes, right. So we know how to do basic client-server communication. Yes. Right now we're just spitting out, echoing back the name of the function. But certainly we want to do something more than that. What do we want to do? We want to parse out the username and password, right, and see if there is a username with and matching username and password. Yes? We need to iterate over this array to see if there is a username and password that match. Correct? All right, so let's do that. First, let's retrieve the username, and we can retrieve the username. Again, where is this coming from? Where's the username and password coming from? From the client, right? It's coming from the request. So we're going to find it in the request object, right? In the first object that we passed it along. Yes? But the request has many things in it. It has cookies, headers. Well, cookies are headers. The actual URL, the timestamp when this was created, the IP address of the browser. But also it has these query parameters in there too, right? And you can find that in an object, in a map, in a JSON map called query as part of the request. So request.query. We can actually print it out and see what's in it. You can say console log request.query. So let's do that. Let's restart. Actually, let's echo it. Let's send this back to see what's in it. Let's send it back to the client who sent it to us, right? So let's restart the server. Let's go back. Let's refresh. If we log in and we click on it, notice that that's indeed what we sent over. We sent we sent that username. We sent that password. See that? That is what we sent. There's our username. That's the password in there. And it parsed it from the URL. It parsed it from the URL, and it provides it to us in a nice little map in the query parameter. You see that? Right. So we can extract the username from request.query.username, and we can extract the password from request.query password. Yes, right? And now that we have it, we can iterate over the array here. Okay, and I think we already have that code, don't we? Somewhere here. There it is. That's the code that we need. Let's retrieve it from here, and let's pass it now. Let's move it over to the server. This is the same exact code that used to be in the client, right? That you used to do just the last assignment. But we moved it over to the server. What is it doing? It's iterating over the users. Okay. If it finds it, if the username matches the username which we just parsed out, right? Then we're not going to return it. Instead, we're going to do a response. We're going to send it back. We're going to send back the user object. Okay. If not, then we're going to return null. Well, not return. We're going to respond, send back null. Okay? All right, so let's try that out. Let's start the server. Let's refresh over here. Let's clear this out. Let's log in as this user. Notice that it comes back with, well, that's not right. Wait, what? Oh, I didn't find it. We got an error message. Let's see. What's it saying? We can't send nulls. Okay, I think we can send zeros. We can send strings, but we can't send actual nulls. Let's start the server again. Let's try refresh. Log in. It came back with what? Can't send header. Where are we sending this over here? Let's put a breakpoint there. Let's restart. Put a breakpoint there. Oh, yes, you're right. Thank you. Yeah, stop. I don't want to continue and return it twice. What's happening here is that it was sending it, right? And if not, it continues. You can't send once the server sends a response, right? The connection is ready to be flushed out and closed, right? So you can't keep sending stuff after that first send. Let's put a breakpoint there. Let's restart. Let's refresh. Log in. There we are. We're on the server side. We have users, and let's continue. Let's see if we find it. 2, 3, 4. Okay, didn't find it, and it's going to send a 0. And it still says, "Why are you request?" Oh. I was sending it twice, explicitly. Have I told you how much I hate computers? log in. Okay, there it is. So it's not finding it, and it's going to return a 0. There is my 0. And if we click on there's the request, it comes back as 0, right? So it didn't find it, right? But instead, if we type in an existing user, Bob and Bob, we do a login, it comes back. Notice that it's going to send back the user, right? And it's going to return. The user is, hopefully it's Bob. There it is, it's Bob. And we're going to say continue. And it comes back. We click on it. Notice that indeed we got the user from the server. Everybody okay? Make sense? So on the we're getting it back on the client right here. This URL is fetching it, but notice that it's not sending it back to the controller. Let's send it back to the controller. Let's return to the controller whatever that comes back from the server. So let's go back to the controller. This is the call. There it is. So the whatever the service is returning, we are assigning it to this local variable user. Yes, so that if we can look at that source code, we can look at the views, user control login. We can put a breakpoint right here on that user when it comes back from the server. So if we refresh and we use Bob and Bob, we do a login. Notice that it comes back from the server. Let's hover over user. Notice that it's not exactly what we were expecting. It's not the actual user object. Instead, because of the latency between the browser sending the HTTP request, right, and by the time the server comes back, the single thread in the browser we can't risk it waiting for this cycle to complete. All right, it could take a couple milliseconds, even a second or so, for the server to respond, right? So if it will be a multi-threaded application on the browser, maybe, okay? We could just have a thread handle that, and then might have other threads to work with. But here we only have one thread. So instead, we use technology called Ajax, where we are delegating the request to the browser. The browser has no problem with generating multiple requests simultaneously, right? Multiple threaded. So the browsers are multiple threaded. So Ajax allows us to ask the browser to handle our request for us, right? And we have to just register a callback for when the browser is done. Yes. So let's rewrite our controller to work that way. We're gonna let's rewrite it. Our controller. Let's go. Where's our controller? What we get back from here is not the user itself. Instead, what we get is a promise. Okay, we got a promise object. The promise object has a method that allows us to register for that callback. Okay, it could be an anonymous function, just like over here, right? Or it could be an actual function, right? Since this function, the only time that we are ever going to use this function is as a callback from the server. Okay, we're not going to explicitly call this function ever, right? More common is to use it as an anonymous function. Yes, right. But if you intend for this function to be called from different places, you should create it. You should create an actual function. Anyway, so here we get is the response from the server. Right, embedded in that response is the actual user, hopefully. Right? And what we're going to do is that we're going to move the original logic, the navigation logic, we're going to put it in that callback. Right? So the callback is going to call our logic, which is going to happen after the response comes back from the server, and then we have data that we can act on. And this logic is appropriate that it's here in the controller. The controller is the one who's handling error messaging and navigation, right? What it's doing, it's setting the current user and then navigating to the profile user ID. Okay, right? All right. Let's see. Let's refresh our login controller. Let's put a breakpoint right here and then right here. Right. So let's log in with Bob. Let's log in with Bob. Bob and Bob. Log in. Okay, there's our promise, right? And we're going to continue. Notice that is going to go out to the server. See, notice that we hit that promise even before it got to the server. See that? Right. So as far as the client is concerned, it makes that call. It doesn't wait for even for the server to respond. It just keeps going. See that? Right. It didn't wait. Now we get to the server. The server finds it, and then now it goes back to the client. So there it is. Now it stops at the client side, and the client comes back with a response. The response, notice that it has a embedded data object that actually has the data of the user that come back from the server, right? So we need to do some more refactoring here. We need to break out the user. The user is actually inside of the response.data. Okay, so let's refresh. Let's try it again. Okay, let's go back. Let's go Bob, login, continue. Goes out back to the server, and then continues, and it goes back to the client. There it is, the client. And do we have a user? We have a user. See that? And then we're ready to navigate to user ID, which is profile sub 234. Right, go next. It navigates to the user to profile 234. The profile doesn't seem to be working. We'll need to fix that. Probably we did some modification last time, and we'll do that next. Any questions on the login? Does it make sense? All right. Okay, one other thing before we leave, the login is that we had agreed on a naming convention for these URLs. Okay, what we had said was that all these URLs, we were all going to put them inside of /API. Remember that? Okay, again, this was to disambiguate whether this was a folder, whether this was a file, right? And this clearly tells us, by convention, that we all agree, right? And it's a very common convention in the industry, that this is not meant for fetching static HTML files or folders. This doesn't map to anything physical, right? It maps to something virtual, something that is in the RAM. It's either in RAM or something that is being read from data store. It's data. Okay, it's dynamic data. It's not static content. Yes, right. So if we make that change, we need to go back to the client service and also add /API in front of it. Let's refresh. Let's go back to the login. Let's refresh and go Bob, and login. Promise goes back to the server. Comes back, and here it is, data. It finds it, and it goes back to the profile. So it's still working. All right, it still works. All right, so let's leave it here, and now let's move on to the profile. Yes?